The story of the land between the lakes is a staple in the Dogman research field. An unexplained massacre is said to have occurred in this region in the 1980s, when a family of 4 was supposedly found mangled within the park. Explanations range from mountain lions to the legendary Manwolf. Recent claims from an alleged witness further complicate the story. Consulting a controversial timeline of events, the Manwolf Files team attempts to scrutinize these new claims. So, the land between the lakes is a national recreation area in Kentucky, and there have been reports of a wolfman type creature seen there. I was contacted by a TV show, a network television show, just to talk to me about L.B.L. a little bit and possibly to fly me out there, which would have been right after the Rougarou Chasing Legends episode, so it would have been like double Dogman, you know? As far as I could trace it back, there's been a couple of like old, unsubstantiated legends, meaning that I couldn't find anything else more on these. So one of them is about a man who moved his family to this particular region from Europe in the 1800s. And so probably one of the early Kentucky settlers. And reportedly he had a disease that made him mad when the night came. And this was a genetic disease that was passed down from him to his children. And so this whole family was reclusive. They didn't go to school with the other kids. They didn't, behave normally. They didn't socialize normally. And one day they just disappeared. And I guess some people went to investigate their homestead in the early 1900s and found it completely abandoned. And the fate of this family is unknown. Another one is also from early Kentucky settlers, is when bison used to be in this area, and they would stumble upon half-eaten bison carcasses, some of them with their throats ripped out by what seemed to be like large claws. And they're trying to reintroduce bison into the state of Kentucky nowadays, and reportedly every once in a while a calf will go missing, one of the bison will go missing, and the entire herd is spooked for days, and they get in their defensive formation and will remain like that for days on end. So whether that's indicative of, just a regular sort of predator in the area or something else happening there is a little unclear. There's some French settler history bringing the legend of the loup-garou, as you may know, Rougarou legends in Louisiana, but also coming up as far north as Kentucky as well. So who knows? I think it has a lot to do with some of the more recent sightings in the 70s and the 80s, because those are the ones that really stand out as sort of. And I mean, even when you compare it to like Beast of Bray Road, I mean, there's nothing like what's in the land between the lakes, as far as I know. So in 1973, there was a group of Murray State University students who went camping at one of the lakes. And they were enjoying the woods, it's the weekend, they're just chilling, having a good time, they build a fire, they're hanging out. One of them decides to go to the bathroom. And he gets up and he goes off into the woods. And when he comes back, he says that he had a feeling like he was being watched. And also that he heard something sniffing around in the woods. And everyone else just kind of shrug it off. They're like, oh, it's probably just a hog. But as nightfall comes, he begins to get a little bit more nervous, and so does everyone else, because they start hearing things moving around the camp. They start hearing things shuffling around in the dead leaf fall. And they shine their flashlights at it, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever this thing is, but they never see anything. And that's when the howling started. And they described it as a sort of a wolf's howl mixed with something else that they said it sounded like it was mocking them, which is something that comes up a lot in a lot of Dogman reports, is the feeling of being mocked or uh, smirked at, it's just kind of this almost a teasing personality. It's really strange. And this howling goes on for a couple of minutes and it seems to come from all sides. And, at first it's over here, then it's over there. And they start seeing eyes staring at them from the darkness. It's moving around. It's not staying in one spot. They have a Volkswagen microbus with them. They all pile in, start peeling out. That's when they notice there's something chasing them in the taillights. That's the only thing illuminating this thing. It's a big, shadowy figure that's literally chasing after them, that's running after them. They slow down to take a corner, and they feel a jolt on the car. They feel like something's holding the car back. And they rev the thing into full speed and peel out of there. And when they get back to campus, they get out of the car and they examine it. They find 4 claw marks in the engine compartment, because the engine's in the back of the vehicle on the microbus. They find 4 of them, like claw marks on the vehicle. And again, I wish I had more details for this story. I wish I had one of these people's names. I wish I had, photographs or something to provide more details for this, but I really don't.
While you have smaller stories like that spread throughout the Land Between the Lakes area, the main reason that researchers for Dogman focus on the Land Between the Lakes region is that there is this very widespread story that supposedly happened in the late 80s where a family camping there was attacked and unfortunately died in this attack by some kind of animal. The person who broke the story is named Janet Thompson. She supposedly worked at a convenience store or a store of some similar nature just outside of the park. She broke the story to Barton Nunnally, this author, back in 2005, and was actually recorded on camera talking about the story by Tom Biscardi, who's a rather controversial Bigfoot researcher, back in either 2010 or 2011.
The Land Between the Lakes. Yes. Okay. Why we're here today is for something that happened back in the early 80s. Okay. I worked at the L.B.L. that used to be across the street from Razor's. 2 of the local police officers came in one early morning. They were very distressed. They were one was actually throwing up. They were very pale. Evidently, I was thinking they had seen a horrible accident, on the highway. Mm-hmm. But they said they had been called down here in this area. There was a family that had been killed. A young married couple had come down here and discovered them at a small campsite right up the road here. The family, they had a camper. The camper's front and back doors were open. One was like on a hinge. There was bloody handprints all over the camper, and slide like there had been a tremendous struggle. The bodies, there was evidently a father, a mother, and a young boy that were found. They were pretty well tore apart, very mangled. There were scratch marks, deep gouges in the father's back. The wound marks, the bite marks were like a wolf shape, but the wolves aren't that big enough to do this much damage. When they was going to the camper, they found the father's clothes, the mother's, and the son's clothes, and then they also found some little girl's clothing. So they knew they was missing a body. I'm getting chills. Sorry. I was listening to them. I was just astounded. Right. The one that was getting sick and throwing up, he had some blood on his patrolman's hat and some on his shirt. He's the one that found her. And like I said, they're going around with flashlights. This is in the middle of the night, and some blood dripped on his hat. And he shined the flashlight up, and he said he saw her hanging from a branch up there. He saw the little white hand, and he saw a foot with a little white sock still on it. They did find some hair samples, long gray and brown, I think, hair samples, in the tree where she was, and in one of the father's hands. It was all tangled. Police officers were told that some government officials finally came in and told them not to talk to the media. Everything was hush hush. This never happened.
That was my next question.
Okay, they were threatened with their pensions, their jobs. They had like a makeshift roadblock where you couldn't get back that road.
So like a crime scene investigation going on.
Right, right.
Okay. I not only heard it from her.
And the thing about Janet's story is that it's weird in the first place, but it's also the first version of the story that we have. And what that suggests is this should be our touchstone in our analysis for Roger's potential story. Roger, which is it's not the person's real name, but we call them Roger because that's what they tend to just go off of on the internet in order to remain anonymous, came out in the last few years talking about his supposedly having been there for this attack that Janet Thompson described. The problem being is that not only do both Roger's and Janet Thompson's stories kind of sound strange, in terms of police presence versus military presence and such, but there's also inconsistencies between them. So one example of what Roger says is an inconsistency, and he's been on many podcasts saying this, is the location of one of the bodies. Roger asserts that one of these creatures, which he supposedly witnessed, was found in a tree, not the body of the young girl, whereas Janet Thompson describes the young girl and the family being found up in the tree. We also have sort of a cultural spin-off of Roger's story happening with a lack of clarity as to the descriptions of the animals Roger supposedly saw. He's pointed to several sketches, most of them not being this one here, but this has been likened to what Roger describes. More accurately, he's been using this sketch, which is one found from the website DeviantArt. However, again, there's different iterations of what Roger's described, and some sketches have some anatomical features correct according to his story, and some don't. So we actually have this piece of artwork here that kind of helps us to visualize what it is that Roger's talking about when he mentions his version of the story. Roger's version of the story is that he knew this family in that they were ex-Amish, and they had been, essentially, they'd either voluntarily left or been excommunicated from their Amish township, and were camping here, and then this occurrence happened. Roger doesn't seem to suggest that any of it is supernatural. He believes, at least according to his story, that this was a natural event. He claims to have been there for it, claims that there were gunshots, that there was one animal that he observed. Some versions of it say two, but Roger asserts that he only saw one of these creatures, which he likens to a Dogman, and that he was under the motorhome of the family at one point while the attack was happening, that he saw the bodies, that they were actually not that badly damaged. There were no police there for quite a while, that officials eventually did come in, and they all saw the body of a creature, whether it was one of multiple creatures or not, up in a tree. And, there's been a lot of debate about that story, partially because this is such an embedded story in the culture of Dogman research. Jody Cook, the head of the North American Dogman Project, he had a debate on the show Paranormal Roundtable with Roger, one that Barton Nunnally actually got involved in, about his story. And there's kind of a strange confliction, because what Jody points out is, well, all of the things that Roger is talking about are kind of new elements of the story. The problem being, and Jody actually brings this up too, is that the story in the first place is pretty shaky. As far as we know, there is no police documentation of this incident having occurred. We don't have any newspaper articles either. Now, Janet Thompson back in 2010 to 11 on camera talked about the military coming in, and that these two officers who she claims to have spoken to, who talked about the little girl up in the tree and such, are the only law enforcement officials locally who knew about this, and that they were threatened essentially with their pensions to not talk about it publicly. So you have this really weird kind of concoction of not having a solid base for what exactly to look at this story through. Because if Janet's story is true, it doesn't, it would make sense that we don't find any documentation, because there wouldn't have been supposed to have been any. On the other hand, we can get as close to that as we can, which is, let's assume that Janet's made this whole thing up. Well, then both stories are false. If both stories are false, then that's that. Then if Janet's made it up, then Roger's obviously making it up. Because if Janet has truly made up the event, then she's not basing it off of anything in that particular assumption. However, if Janet is telling the truth, that would also mean that Roger's story is not viable, because it goes beyond just misinterpretations of the event. It actually stretches into retellings of the event that would be inaccurate if Janet Thompson's version of the story is accurate. Now, there's no such thing as no room for in-between in many cases. So we do have the possibility that maybe Janet's indulged or exaggerated parts of the story. The thing we'd want to look for is the documentation, but going off of Janet's story, if that is true, there is no documentation. The likelihood that the newest stories that we have, not any particular focus, but stories like Roger's, the likelihood that those are true is kind of getting slimmer. The story that Roger presents is likely to be untrue, but in a lot of ways so is Janet's story. And Roger's story is dependent on Janet's story to a great degree. So it's a strange confliction that we have going there, but we do have conflictions, and we do have Janet coming forward long before Roger came forward, before a lot of the people came forward about it. And a lot of stories don't match up. Janet's is kind of the one that all of us look to because it was the first one. It's possible that the rest are copycat stories. Barton Nunnally talks about that a bit. It's a strange case. It's a very strange case. This newest iteration of the story is controversial, and it's confusing, and in this analysis, it's probably not a valid story. But we're talking about a story that is unlikely to be valid in the first place. So, there's an extra layer of mystery on that. And really, what is this field without that?